I hope you're enjoying the novel, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some things to consider regarding it, ways to visualize it, and some tips on both essays. So your author is Toni Morrison. She is a Pulitzer Prize and Nobel Prize winning author, one of the first African Americans to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in America. She has many books. I think she's up to 12 or 14 books now, novels that she's written. And this is one of her lesser known novels, but I find it a unique opportunity because it's one of the few, the only one that's written where it's located outside of the U.S. for part of the novel, or a good portion of it. And it also has main characters who are white interacting with African American characters. So she really takes on the issue of class and race in this novel, and for that reason I found it a good fit and interesting to focus on for this class. As I said, part of this novel takes place outside the U.S. in the Caribbean. And while the name of the island is a fake or made-up name, Isle of Chivalry, which is means horses because there's horsemen on the island, she does mention a real island, Dominica, which is, you can see here on the map, is a real place. So when they talk about Son going from island to island, this would be the area he had been in before he was in Florida. The actual house is like a plantation type establishment. It has swampland, which is why I thought this is a house actually on one of the Caribbean islands that stood out to be built around the same time. So this gave me a good visual of what it would have looked like. So it's a large space, old trees, swampland nearby, and kind of might give you a visual of what the grounds look like. As far as the characters, there's Jadine. She is a light-skinned African-American model, has spent time getting educated in Paris and spends time in New York. This is, when I saw this photo, this is how I imagined her. And then there's Son, who's more earthy. He represents nature while she represents more civilization. His long dreads, he's lived on boats a lot of his life. Although he has the ability to be more refined, we find out later that he knows how to play piano and has had some upbringing as well. There's a scene later in the book where he is in Florida, back in his hometown, and Jadine visits him there. And so when they cross over, that nature and civilization intersect, you see some of the conflicts. Then there's Valerian and Margaret Street. Valerian's a lot older, 20 some odd years older, or almost 30 than Margaret. And this is sort of, he's white, he's wealthy, he comes from Pittsburgh, Philadelphia area, and I thought this sort of represented what they might have appeared like. It gives a sense of her being very concerned and consumed by her appearance, where he's a little more down to earth, although not that much more. Ondine and Sydney are the staff. They are married. They've been working for the Valerians for a long time, and they've traveled from the U.S. to the Caribbean to be with them. They have an interesting position in the book because they are both interacting with the white people in the house, but then they also have their home and their connection underneath. And their niece is Jadine, or Jade. And so their interactions with her, there's definitely a division between how Jadine was raised on Valerian's money and how they live. There's also some interesting interactions once things shift in the novel, and Sydney takes on more of a role of power in his relationship with Valerian. That is something to watch. And also the Christmas scene where the downstairs and upstairs sort of interact at the table. Then there's Gideon and Therese. Therese is an original inhabitant of the island. She is partially blind, and she is not even known by her first name to many of the people in the house. She's known as one of the Marys. Gideon is from the U.S. He's poor. He lives with Therese, and they're representing more of nature. He loves apples, gets in trouble for eating apples, and connects well with Son and are very generous with him. A little bit of history. This is where the island like this would have looked like in the 1890s to 1920s. These were islands were colonized and used to produce goods via slavery. So slaves typically were Indian, East Indian, and sometimes African, and they would be brought here and worked And then small inhabitants like this on the left were built over time until wealthy landowners started using the islands as vacation spots. And then the main product was sugarcane. A few other products as well, but that was the primary product that was used. The book Tar Baby, the title, comes from a story, actually it comes from Native American and African folklore, but in print, the first story comes from Uncle Remus, which was a white man, Joel Chandler Harris, wrote the book. And he kind of made a caricature of an old African American who had been a slave and now was free, and sort of was this kind but sort of dim-witted character who told stories. And one of his stories was about Brer Rabbit getting messed up with the tar baby. And this was also retold later with Disney in the movie Song of the South, which is now taken off in Disneyland. They haven't taken off, meaning removed from Disneyland and other places because of its racist overtones. To get caught up in a tar baby means to get caught up in something and cause more problems by doing so, meaning that you get the tar stuck on you. And but it's known as a reference for a racist phrase now, and so it's one to be avoided. Some politicians recently used it in reference to Obama and got some criticism for that. The horsemen are mentioned throughout the novel, and they are mythic characters who live on the island. They might be connected to this idea of revelations, the horsemen revelations. They're not directly. It's sort of the idea that they kind of run around or ride around the island in a way that's more connected to nature than the colonists who kind of have ruined the island or corrupted it in some way. So while you'll be looking at this idea of nature versus civilization and comparing and looking at some characters and what they represent, but you'll also be applying some cultural analysis to the text. And so we're using Dr. Joy DeGruy-'s post-traumatic slave syndrome as our analysis text and applying it to Tar Baby. Dr. Joy DeGruy, you've seen probably the video of her on our website, web access site, and she talks about these 3 behavior patterns. Power belief she doesn't talk about as much, but it's in the chapter. But then the vacant esteem, ever-present anger, and racist socialization. So you're going to take one of these and identify it into one of the characters, or maybe 2, to kind of demonstrate how these reveal cultural authenticity in the characters. So vacant esteem, it is this idea about one's worth, and the idea that you might not have any worth. And this is prevalent among African Americans, according to DeGruy, via the messages they hear from society, community, and family. It can come through different ways in family. It can come through misdirected discipline. She gives examples of this. The idea, if you have low self-worth and you are disciplining your child, you may actually kind of take away their self-esteem rather than build it up by the types of discipline and rules that you give. Also, through society, you have misdirected, or institutions, you have over-incarceration. And so this idea that if so many people in one population are being incarcerated, what does that say about the population and the dominant culture's view of it? Another way it comes across is continued school segregation. We now are more segregated in the United States school system than we were in 1960s, which is kind of shocking. Many elite white families do not want to have their kids go, and not elite, even middle class, don't want their kids to go to public schools in certain urban areas, and so they do whatever they can to put them in private schools so that more of their kind could be there. And that leaves the public schools basically filled with kids of the minorities and kids that maybe don't have the money or the support. And so there's a lot of segregation in our schools right now, and that can cause vacant esteem. Finally, financial discrimination, otherwise known as redlining. This has happened recently in 2012. Wells Fargo was founded to basically they with Latinos and African Americans, they got caught charging a higher interest in mortgage rates. It affected 36,000 clients, and they had to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars to those clients in a class action suit. Also, the media can have an impact on your esteem, the esteem of African Americans. Repeatedly seeing images of yourself as in a helping position or lower position, or when a crisis happens, being focused on this imagery around thuggery rather than more balanced imagery in the media. So some indicators of vacant esteem: you talk to the kids, they talk about not wanting to live or not thinking they will live very long, or you also see crabs in a barrel, people fighting with each other in the same racial group and with African Americans to fight to get to the top, and they'll push each other down in the process. The second area is ever-present anger. She gives an example of her friend in the movie theater for this, and this is what happens when repeated goal is blocked. So there's continuous discrimination and racism. There's recent research showing that it was easier for a white male felon to get a job than it was for an African American who was educated with a bachelor's degree. Other reason ever-present anger is there is because among African Americans this comes via slavery, and slavery was a violent and angry process. It happened for 250 years, and it continued in other forms via Jim Crow for another 100 years. We've only been 50 years where African Americans, since the civil rights movements, where African Americans have been on some sort of level playing field, but there's a lot of work to do to get them integrated and connected in society to a way where they have free, similar access, equitable access to everything white Americans have as well. One of the issues with this as well is that people under ever-present anger learn the way of their captors and sometimes do that to others. Racial socialization. So this is the idea that you adopt the slave master's values. An example of this could be seen in the media with the whitewashing of African American stars by the media to make them look more white. This one on the right is a famous movie called Imitation of Life, and it's about an African American woman who works for and befriends a white woman, and her daughter then, who lives at the house with the mom, has to deal with integration issues and segregation issues and whether or not they can claim, and the African American mom actually takes on the views of the white woman, which was sort of shocking at that time. So as you're writing these essays, I want you to consider some, the nature versus civilization, which characters are represented by nature and which by civilization, and then consider when they cross into each other's realm, what is the effect, and what are some symbols or some ideas of that. And in the second essay with post-traumatic slave syndrome, you want to find a behavior pattern as seen in one or two of the characters. By locating an established pattern, you can better understand how slavery and its impact connects to this idea of cultural authenticity. Okay. If you have more questions, please let me know. I also set up a essay skeleton for you with a sample in there that should be helpful. I look forward to hearing from you.